Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we are having discussion on research method. We have already discussed yesterday what is surveys and sampling in detail. Today we will move further and we will talk about the important method of research. There are mainly two methods. One is case study, the other is theoretical study, which are used in all disciplines. We will try to understand both of these methods. Each of them have their own advantage and disadvantage. We will try to know, and we will also talk about similarity and differences between these two methods. And for discussion of this very topic, we have in the studio the same resource person, Dr. Rajan Kumar. He is assistant professor in a School of International Relations in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and his area of specialization is research method and international relations. So, on behalf, I welcome Dr. Kumar for EduSet lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. In research, in every discipline, if you come from any discipline of social sciences, you must have encountered two kinds of researches. One is theoretical research and the other is case study research. And you must be wondering that what kind of research is appropriate for the research that you're planning to do. And the related question is whether the process of theory generation be inductive or deductive. So method, and one more important thing that you have to remember is that whether the method be historical, case study, discourse based or deductive nomological. So these are the things that you have to remember when you try to explain, try to do a research, and that you have to understand why some of these methods that you have to master before you do the research. The one thing that you have to further remember is unity of positivist method desirable over the pluralism of method that you have in social sciences, and that I'll explain one by one. But first, I would like to explain what the theoretical research is and how theoretical researches are different from the case study researches. And this debate is very important in the sense that theoretical studies will involve large number of cases. You have theories are based on a huge comparison of cases, where the best of the theories in fact include all the cases in the universe, and universe here refers to all the cases which are available for your for the research question that you have in your mind. On the other hand, you have contextual studies. Contextual studies are nothing but the case studies, and keep in mind that when you try to generate a theory on the basis of case, so that process is known as the inductive process. And inductive, as you know, as we discussed in the previous lecture, inductive logic is when you go from particular to general, so that logical process of inference is known as the inductive process. But when you try to go the other way around from theory to case study, so that process is known as deductive process. So when you have theory and you are testing a theory through a case, so that process is known in research methodology literature, or in the logical process, that method is the deductive process. So the question here to understand is whether the theory generation process should be inductive or deductive, and that is again one thing that you learn in the lecture today. And you must be encountering different kind of methods being used by various kind of scholars. For example, some of the people do historical methods, some of the people do case study methods, some of the people do discourse based, sometimes known as the postmodern cognitive studies, and sometimes people use deductive nomological. When I use the term deductive nomological, so that is nothing but the theoretical research. And deductive nomological means you have to compare a large number of cases, and the process is theoretical method process. So the difference is very crucial before you start the research, and you should be wondering that what research method would be appropriate for your kind of research. So you have to keep in mind that the crucial thing to understand is that this should be determined by the research question that you have in your mind. Case studies are useful for some kind of research questions, and theoretical studies are useful for other kind of research questions that you have. So your research questions should determine what kind of research you plan to do for your study. And again, you should be wondering that why isms. I'm referring to theoretical isms. Theoretical, for example, a structuralism and the varieties are liberalism, Marxism, why these isms dominate or prevail over the contextual case study in social sciences. So that is one thing again which can be explained by the debate that we are undertaking today. And if I have to compare the global trend of research and the Indian trend, you'll find that in global trend, the trend is to generate theory. So the focus there is to generate theory. But in the case of India, what we do is that we apply the theory developed in a different context. So there is a difference here, the theory generation and application of theory. And for theory generation, you have to have a comparative case study where you compare large number of cases, and that's the reason if you see the most of the universities in Anglo-Saxon world and Europe, so they do large number of statistical statistical study, quantitative study, because if you have large number of cases, quantitative studies become very handy. And the second method again which is used to explain the theory or to establish the theory is the formal modeling. In formal modeling you use game theory. You might be knowing game theories which are used by economists. Now this is used in sociology. Now this is also used in political science. So the formal modeling is again very popular, and if I have to tell you the exact percentage, if you see the best of the journals in the world, so 60% of the articles you will find are statistical, nearly 20% of the articles are formal modeling, and only 20% of the articles are case study or historical. Keep in mind that case study and historical studies, and by and large they are qualitative studies, and as I told you that case studies or historical studies you will have just one case or a small number of cases. And then if I come to the Indian trend, where the trend is to apply theory, whether this is Marxism, whether this is liberalism or any other theories. So theories are developed in a different context and they are being applied in the case of India. So that is the Indian trend. Indian trend is the application of theory, and here you will find that most of the studies in India are qualitative, and by and large they are case study and historical studies, and they constitute nearly 90% of all the researches that you have. Then again some of the researches are statistical in India, and they involve larger, but they are done mostly by the economist and not by sociologists or political scientists as you do in other countries. And formal modeling is almost absent in India. Some of the people do it, but most of the other people, they don't do it. This partially explains why India has few theoreticians. If you see discipline like political science, sociology, economics, most of the theories are developed in the Western context, and they are being developed by the Western scholars. Now the crucial thing that comes to my mind, and which should bother you also, that why India is not generating a large number of theoreticians as you have in the Western countries. So one is if I have to give you the narrow research methodological explanation of that explanation is that the kind of methodology that they require, the kind of journals, most of the best of the journals in the world, they require a certain kind of methodology, and the training is missing. But there is a bigger substantive part which goes to the debate of knowledge and power, that how knowledge travels with power and how the Western countries have monopolized power and knowledge. So that is other substantive reason why we have few theoreticians in India. And one of the biggest challenge before the Indian theoretician is to generate universal theories, which is at the moment lacking in the context of India. Now, before I proceed, I would like to explain what is a theory, because I am trying to compare a theory with the case study. So it's important to understand what a theory is. It's very difficult to define theory, but I can explain some of the broader features of a theory. All the theories will definitely have these features. Number one is broad generalization. So any theory is based on the broad generalization. As I told you earlier, that in a case study you have just one case or a small number of cases, but in theories have universal applications. So in that case it cannot be based on just one case, it has to be a number of cases, and that is the reason broad generalization is one of the crucial features of any theory. The second important aspect of a theory is explanation. All the theories explain something. What is explanation? When I use the term explanation, that means explaining in terms of cause and effect. You have to explain how A is leading to B, for example. So A is explaining, A is the cause, A is the independent variable, and B is the outcome, and B is the dependent variable. So all the theories explain some features. For example, there is a theory in international politics which is known as liberal democracies do not fight. So liberal democracy is the independent variable here, and not fighting is the dependent variable. So one is leading to the other. So independent variable is causing the outcome. So that causation here, the theory is trying to explain something. Or for example, when you talk of Newton's theory of every action, third law of motion, where you have every action has an equal reaction. So here action is explaining the reaction. So all the time, all the theories, whether this is natural science or this is social science, they try to explain. So so the two features that I told you, one is broad generalization and the second is explanation. And third important feature of any theory, I'm talking about all the scientific theory, is prediction. Prediction is one important aspect of any theory. You can test, you can have any theory of social science or natural sciences, and all the theories will definitely have this feature of prediction. Why prediction? Because one of the important features of any theory is that if a theory is applicable in a case A, so that should be applicable in case B also. You cannot say that my theory is applicable to just one case, because theory is based on a huge number of cases, and the best of the theories take into account the universal cases, all the cases possible, the entire population, if I have to use the term of statistics. So all the cases which are available in the population, so all the cases have to be taken into account if I have to generate a theory. For example, if I have to generate a theory on say ethnicity and conflict, so in that case I'll take into account all the cases prevailing in the world, all the cases where you have ethnicity and conflict, and after that I'll try to generate a theory based on that. So as a result, my theory will have universal application. I cannot say that my theory is applicable just to India or just to the case of Kashmir. No. If you are generating a theory, so that theory has to be applicable in all the cases and not just one case. So prediction is an important aspect of prediction. Is not in terms of forecasting, or prediction is not in terms of astrological prediction, but prediction in terms of if this has happened in the past, if the same variables come again, so the outcome would be similar. So prediction in that sense rather than astrological sense. And universality is another thing that you have, that is part of theory. As I told you, that best of the theories are universal in nature, because theories are based on a number of cases. So universality is one of the important features of any theory. Again, in Newton's theory, for example, that every object gravitates towards the earth. So that theory is applicable throughout the world. It's not just the India or United States. So every theory, and the best of the theories, are universal in nature. And other important thing is falsifiability. In falsifiability refers to the context that if you are giving a scientific theory, you should leave the space for falsification. If you are saying that your theories cannot be falsified under any circumstances, in that case your theory will not stand the chance of being called a scientific theory. Please keep in mind that this scientific theory, the concept of falsification has been given by a famous philosopher called Karl, and he was trying to critique the positivist method which was prevalent before him, and he said that a theory to be scientific has to be falsifiable, and we'll discuss this again later in the lecture today. But falsification should be taken as an important aspect of any theory. Again, the next aspect of a theory is non-factual speculative statement. This is very important, and there is a scholar called Kenneth Walsh, and he says that that a theory has to be away from the fact, because if you just take the facts stand true for just one case. So theory is a very speculative process where you try to understand the median feature of various cases and not just the one case. So it's not exactly the factual statement, it's a speculative statement rather than a factual statement. So these are the important features of any theory. I'll just repeat again. First is generalization, second is explanation, third is prediction, fourth is universality, fifth is falsifiability, and sixth is non-factual speculative statement. So these are the broader things that you have to understand when you talk of any theory, and this applies to natural sciences, social sciences, communication studies, and all the scientific researches. So these things you have to keep in mind. Now I am coming to the case. What do you mean by the case? When you say case study, so what do you mean by the case? Case is not I'm not talking about the legal case, although legal cases are also cases, and that can be one of the important method of legal studies and legal researches. But here I'm referring to a particular unit, because in population you have number of cases. A case will refer to one particular unit, And in case study, you do a detailed and intensive observation of culture in the context or of a firm. So the important thing here to remember is that this is done, the case study is done for a detailed and intensive study. Here your commitment is towards the intensive and in-depth analysis of the case. So that commitment should not be done away with if you're planning to do a case study. And your case should be representative of the research problem. For example, if I want to do a research on, say, ethnicity and conflict, so what I'll do, I'll try to select a case which is related, which represents the case. In that case, for example, I might select the case of Kashmir, or I might select the case of say Quebec in Canada, or I might select the case of Nagaland, Manipur in India, or LTT case in Sri Lanka. So these are the methods of selecting a case. You have to decide that which case you want to choose. That should again be decided by the kind of resources, convenience, and all of the factors, where it's easier for you, where it's convenient for you, and where you can collect the data without any difficulty. So these are some of the considerations where you can select the case. But you should also keep in mind one thing, that you should not be deliberately selecting a case which is very convenient for you. In that case, there is a problem in research which is known as the selection bias. And if you're selecting a case on the basis of your dependent variable is the ethnic conflict, and ethnic conflict in this case. So ethnic conflict, and then you are choosing a case of, say, Kashmir or Sri Lanka. So in that case, it might lead to over confirmation of hypothesis. So that you should be a little careful, and we will come about that in the later part of the discussion. And again, coming back to what a case is, sometimes cases are unique. For example, if I have to explain you the case of, say, the Indian cricket team, in that case, one might be interested in, say, the case of Tendulkar, because Tendulkar's records are amazing in terms of the centuries that he has made in one day and the test, and the kind of average that he has in one day as well as the test. So you might be interested in doing that. Why is he batting so well in the Indian cricket? So that case, but that case also keep in mind that that case is unique. So some of the unique phenomenon you like to do a case study, and for the if the phenomenon is unique, in that case study is very, very useful. So that again has to be kept in mind when you're planning to do a case study. And as I said earlier, case studies do in-depth analysis without external generalization. If I'm planning to do a case study of Kashmir, so in that case my focus would be the case of Kashmir. In that case, the outcomes that have come, or the findings that I've got, it would be a little invalid to generalize the findings of that particular case to other cases, because you have done just one case, and on that basis external generalization will not be possible. And if you try to do that, you have to be extremely careful, because it might lead to certain kind of invalid inferences, and that might create a bias in your study. So you have to be careful when you do a case study. So these are the things that you have to remember. Is a particular unit. Case study is done for in-depth analysis of the case, and is representative of the research problem. Sometimes it can be unique, and you have to do in-depth study without external generalization. So these are the things that you have to remember if you're planning to do a case study. Now, I'll try to distinguish between the theoretical study and the case study. And keep in mind that theoretical studies are by nature is large N comparison. Large N here means large number, because you have to generate, the best of the theories are generated through large number of comparison. So you have to have in your study a large number of cases, and that's what I mean when I write here large N comparison. On the other hand, when you do a case study, case studies, your commitment can be to just one case or just a few number of cases. It cannot be a huge number of cases. So in that case, that becomes theoretical. Second aspect of theoretical study is that it has universal generalization. So because best of the theories are universal in nature, so you have to have generalization which applies to the universe and not to just few cases. On the other hand, when you do a case study, your study is in depth. You go within the case, and your generalization is very limited. You can do some kind of generalization or comparison within the case, but your generalization is very limited. It is limited to one case, two cases, or the number of cases that you plan to do. A third feature of theoretical study is that is always done in the cause and effect framework. In the cause and effect framework, in theories, you always try to explain, as I told you earlier. So cause and effect framework, that's the typical teleological framework that applies to all the theories. On the other hand, when you do case study, that you are more interested in finding the causal mechanism rather than just the cause and the outcome. So here the causal mechanism is important, the intermediate variables are important, the process tracing is important, the phrase being used by case study scholars, the process, you try to trace the process rather than just the cause and the outcome. So that process and the causal mechanism becomes important if you do a case study. And in theoretical study, as I pointed out earlier, explanation and prediction are the two important features of any theory, explanation and prediction. Here in the case study, you are understanding without prediction. You try to understand the culture and the complexity of culture, but you do not try to go into prediction. So understanding is important here. In theoretical studies, there is a distinction between the subject and the object. You go and meet the subject, the people who are the respondent, the people you want to interview. So that is the subject. So in that case, you study the subject, but what you miss out is the intersubjectivity. So how two subjects are interacting among themselves, so that is missing if you do not do the case study. In case study, because you try to observe as a participant observer, so in that case intersubjectivity comes out very clearly. In theoretical and case study, keep in mind that both are equally scientific and both involve logic as well as empirics. So logic is that you learned, for example, inductive and deductive, and the empirics is the observation, the kind of example, the data that you have. So that is empirics. So that applies in theoretical studies as well as case studies. Then another important thing to remember is that theoretical studies are variable oriented. Variable is, for example, the income of a person, or the employment, how that is leading to income of a person. So the level of employment or the kind of employment, that can be the variable, and the income is the outcome. So the theoretical studies are variable oriented, while case studies are context oriented. So that you have to keep in mind. The context is important in case study. In theoretical studies, variable which is important. And since theoretical studies involve a large number of cases, it cannot go into the deep details. It cannot do in-depth analysis of the case, and that's the reason sometimes theoretical studies are referred to as a thin description. On the other hand, when you do case studies, so case study, because you go do an intensive study, you go and do in-depth analysis of the culture, context, and the complexities, intersubjectivity, the way two subjects interact among themselves. So that's the reason this is known as the thick description. While in theories, in theoretical studies, this is known as the thin description. So you take some of the basic features, but you do not go into the detail. You do not do the in-depth analysis. So thin description theoretical studies and thick description are known as the case study. Now I'll bring you to the relation between the case study and the theoretical studies. Here this is very important, because here you have three schools of thoughts. The first school is which considers case studies irrelevant for theory generation due to selection bias, degree of freedom, and absence of generalization. Selection bias, as I told you, selection bias comes in a study when you try to select a case on the basis of dependent variable. There are two types of variable, as I told you, the independent variable and the dependent variable. When you try to select a case on the basis of dependent variable, then selection bias might come in. So and in that case, you cannot randomize your sample. You cannot randomize the number of cases. So selection bias is a problem in the case study. And again, you have degree of freedom, this statistical concept, where you do not have more than one case, the degree of freedom comes. If you want to avoid this problem, you have to have more than one case. But since in case study you can have just one case, so that leads to what is known in the research method literature as the degree of freedom problem. And many of the case studies are may have this kind of problem. So you have to understand this degree of freedom and selection of bias can create some kind of biases in the case study. And there is an absence of generalization. People argue that why case studies are not relevant for generating theory, because there is no generalization. If you have done just one case study, where is the generalization? It's possible that you have done some internal within case generalization, but that may not be relevant for other case. So since you have not done the generalization, so case studies may not be relevant for generating theory. So that's the one school of thought. And the second school of thought tells you that case studies can be useful for testing the theory, because you have generated a theory based on number of cases. Now you have to test the theory. For testing the theory, you have to test that whether the theory applies to one particular case or not. For example, you have theories on feudalism, and now you will test the case of India, that whether the theory on feudalism is applicable to the case of India or not. So that is another correlation that you have, and the scholars argue that case studies are relevant for testing theory and not generating theory. So this is the second school of thought you have, which is related to case study and the theory. The third is again one other extreme, which tells you that the research should be atheoretical. So you should de-theorize the research, which means that since theories are superficial, theories are inconsistent, theories talks about the spurious regularities, so theories are not relevant for research. So this is other extreme where you have, and many of the case study groups and many of the discourse-based postmodern studies, they'll be very critical of theoretical researches, and they consider theoretical researches not to be relevant. So there are three schools. One which tells you that case studies cannot generate theory. Second tells you that case studies can be useful only for testing theory. And third, which tells you that theoretical studies are not relevant at all. So you have two extremes and one takes the middle ground. So you have three schools of thought, all talking about the relation between the case study and theoretical study. So these are some of the underpinnings that you have to keep in mind when you start your research, when you plan to do case study or theoretical study. And also keep in mind that most of the studies in today's world are not necessarily theoretical and case study, but they follow a mixed method where you generate a theory, but you try to test on the basis of the case that you have. So they have mixed up models where the several methods are used in research rather than just one particular method. Now I would like to show you one graph, and here this is the scatter plot. If I have to show the graphical representation of the case, suppose you have 10 or 15 cases. So in a graph, this will look like this. This is the spread of the graph. The cases are spread according to the attributes and the features. There will be a spread in a graph at different places. Now, how do you know that what should be the line of the theory? Where should the theory come from in this kind of graph? So for that, I have the next slide, and here it comes. Yeah, here is the theoretical line. You can see the line and the line which cuts across the spread of the cases, the black line which cuts across the spread of the cases, the line which touches starts from zero and goes diagonally towards the other corner. So that is the regression line. And keep in mind, regression is the concept used in stats to understand the attributes of the theory and how it takes the average line of all the cases, and that can be taken as a theoretical line because theories also take the average of all the cases. Here the advantage here is that it takes exactly the middle line, so it gives you some of the main features or the major features of all the cases. But keep in mind that one particular case can be a little different, because if you see the spread of the cases, they are away from the line that you have, the regression line that you have. So some of the features of the case could be different from the discussions or the descriptions which are given by the theoretical line, and there's a distance between the case and the theoretical line. So that exactly is the deviation that you have. So that the advantage of the theoretical line is that it takes the middle point of all the cases, but the disadvantage is that it does not touch all the cases. So that is the advantage and disadvantage that you have when you do a theoretical and the case study, and this is the graphical representation of the debate that you have between the theory and the case study. Again, the same thing here. You can see the red line here. The red line is the regression line, and it touches some of the cases, but it does not touch other cases, and the other cases are being represented by the green lines, the green dots that you have. The green dots are the cases, and if you see the red line and the green dots, so there is a deviation because they're away from they are not exactly on the theoretical line. Theoretical line is the red line, but the cases are spread at various places and they are not being touched by the regression line. So the same thing, the figure represents a simple bivariate linear regression on a hypothetical data set. The red squares that you see are the predicted values or theoretical values as estimated by the regression line, and while the spread of the cases can be at other places. So you have to see this is again the graphical representation of the case and the theoretical line, which is the regression line that you have. So you have to understand that some of the cases can be treated as outliers, and not all the cases are touched by the regression line, and cases sometimes can be little away from the theoretical line. So now I go to the philosophical problems of case-based inductive inferences. As I told you, that construction of theory from a case will involve necessarily the inductive process of inference. And as I told you, that inductive process of inference can be problematic. And the two philosophers which have argued against this inductive process of inference are Hume and Karl Popper. You might have heard these names. And Hume and Karl Popper, they argue that the principle of induction is superfluous and logically inconsistent. And Popper tells you that you cannot, universal statements can never be drawn from a singular statement, but universal statements can be rejected by the singular statement. What it tells you that that you should start with a theory. Your theory can be rejected by just one case, but your theory cannot be generated from one case or number of cases. And he gives a beautiful example of how people used to think in 16th century, 17th century and earlier, or many people think even now, that there is a division of 12 hours day and 12 hours night, and how that universal statement has emerged. People used to think that, and we all of us see in India at least, that generally you have nearly 12 hours day and 12 hours night. But that has come from inductive experience. We have seen one day and after the other that this is what is happening in India. And as a result, we have come to a conclusion that in the universe, and this is a universal truth, and this is a universal statement, that a day is divided between 12 hours day and 12 hours night. And in 16th and 17th century, when people didn't travel to Arctic, for example, they didn't realize that this universal statement can also be falsified. And why this has a problem? This concept, universal statement of 12 hours day and 12 hours night, had a problem because it was based on inductive experience. And when people went to Arctic, they found that you have 6 months day and 6 months night. So the division of 12 hours day and 12 hours night as the universal statement has been falsified, and that does not stand true. But that experience, that knowledge was generated through inductive experience, through inductive process, and that is the reason, as Karl Popper tells you, that inductive generation of universal statement through inductive process of generating universal statement can be problematic. And the other thing that you have to keep in mind, that theory generated from a case study can be self-confirmatory. The problem, what is the problem here? The problem here is that you generate a theory on the basis of one case or two cases, and then if you have not done other case studies, so you will be testing the theories on the same data that you have generated from one theory or the other. So you are testing the theory being generated from the same set of data. So that testing process can be problematic, and that testing process become self-confirmatory, and that process is again tautological because it's circular. You are generating theory from the same case and also testing the theory on the same case. So that process is tautological and circular. So that process has to be avoided, and these are some of the philosophical problems with the case study. Now, what is the solution given by Karl Popper to avoid this kind of problem? What he tells you is that scientific theory should be deductive rather than inductive. So scientific theory should be deductive with criteria of falsifiability. Falsifiability, as I explained to you, that every theory has to be falsifiable. If your theory is not falsifiable, that becomes metaphysics. You might say that, in metaphysics, for example, stars are guiding the activities of human behavior. But where is the proof? How do you prove it? It's very difficult to prove. You do not have empirical evidences for that. So that becomes more like metaphysics. If you give a theory, your theory has to be falsifiable. For example, if there is a theory in politics which is known as, say, as I told you earlier also, liberal democracies do not fight. That theory, if you can find one example where the two liberal democracies have fought, so in that case, this theory would be rejected. So what is happening here is that universal statement or a theory is being rejected by just one case. So that is one solution given by Popper. What Popper is saying is that you should start with a theory. You should start with a theoretical statement rather than the other way where you start with the inductive process. So you start, in practical terms, you start with a theory and then try to see that whether your theory is explaining the case or not. If it does not explain, or if your case is an anomaly to the theory, so in that case you should reject the theory and you should not be sticking to the same theory. So this is one of the important solutions given by Karl Popper. And Karl Popper again gives two examples, and he compares Marx, Freud, Sigmund Freud, and Einstein. And when he compares, he finds that the theory of Einstein was falsifiable, while many of the Marxist theories and Freud's theory were not falsifiable. What he argued is that when Karl Marx gave the theory, he said that socialist revolution is going to happen in England, because England was the most industrialized country, and there the chances of proletarian revolution was very high because it was industrialized. But Karl Marx said that revolution is going to happen in England. So he told the place where it's going to happen, But when the later Marxist, he argues, Karl Popper argues, when the later Marxists came, they started saying that the revolution is going to happen, but they never specified the time and the place. They did not tell you that on what place and what time the revolution is going to happen. So what Karl Popper argues is that these kind of theories are not falsifiable unless until you tell what time or when and where is going to happen. So those kind of theories are non-falsifiable. And when he compared these theories with Einstein's theory, so he found that Einstein's theories are falsifiable, while these theories, later Marxist, not Marx theory, but later Marxist theories, many of the theories are non-falsifiable. And if your theory is non-falsifiable, then in that case your theory does not stand the chance of being categorized as the scientific theory. So that is one important thing that you have to understand while you compare, while you do a theoretical study. But again, let me tell you that there are certain critiques of theoretical methods, and one of the most important critique has come from the postmodern scholars, and especially there is a postmodern scholar called Lyotard. Lyotard tells you the phrase that he used, and I quote, incredulity towards meta-narratives. And meta-narratives here means nothing but the broad, large theoretical studies. So he tells you that these kind of theories, these kind of meta-narratives are not very useful for research, are not very useful for understanding a phenomenon. And meta-theorizing is one of the normative goals of liberalism. Liberalism is one paradigm in the social science which is used to explain a large number of cases, or which is used to explain different kind of events. It universalizes human behavior. The glory of one of the important things of liberalism is that it says that all human beings are equal, and to a novice person it might appear that this is giving equality to all the persons. All the persons are being treated equal. But the problem with this kind of liberalism is that it obliterates the difference in the culture and difference in the society. It tells you that all the cultures are same, and it does not recognize the identity and the social formations which are different. For example, the Indian social formation may be different from the Russian social formation, and which may be different from the United States and other cultural formations. So the liberalism at one point it treats all individuals as same, but in the process it obliterates the difference. It suppresses the difference which exists within the society and the culture. So there is one scholar called Edmund Burke. He is a philosopher, and he rejected universal liberalism. He tells you that the doctrine that all humanity is same, it does not, it creates more problem rather than solving the problem. So Rudolph and Rudolph, they are two American scholars, and they argue that the Americans have dominated the system, and they have tried to suppress the difference that exists within the culture in the name of rationality, in the name of all the human beings and all the cultures being same. So that is not acceptable to the postmodern scholars, and they argue that the concept of rationality or the unity of science or unity of method, which is the focus of scientific research, so that method is not acceptable, and most of the theories are based on those scientific methods. So those scientific methods have come under critique by the postmodern scholars. Now again, there is a critique of deductive theorization, and as Rudolph and Rudolph, the two political scientists, and there are some other scholars, argue that theoretical studies can be superficial explanation, and they are very parsimonious description. And what happens is that you have a kind of imperialism of categories. Imperialism of categories means that earlier you had imperialism and colonialism. So that was material colonialism. What is happening now is the imperialism of categories, where the categories crafted in a different cultural context, they are being imported in the third world countries and other countries to explain that local indigenous context. So what is happening is that the categories and the concepts are being crafted outside in the Western countries, and they are being used to explain the other context which are completely different. So that is that refers to that imperialism of category that you have. Scholars from a dominant culture, the center, travel to distant places, and then they apply the universal concepts to explain these theories, to explain the other context. And if I have to explain three liberal scholars, for example, Max Weber, Talcott Parson, and John Stuart Mill, these were the liberal scholars, but even these scholars made the mistake of creating a hierarchy when they tried to explain the Western context and the Eastern context. For example, Max Weber tells you that, and I am quoting, that East is fatalist and the West is angelic. The West is angelic and the East is fatalist. So, you can see a hierarchy of knowledge here, that West being treated as angelic, which is better, and the East is fatalist. Similarly, Talcott Parson, and the non-West conveys a status by birth, the West by achievement. Here again in the knowledge you can see a kind of hierarchy. The West is being treated as superior to the East. Similarly, in John Stuart Mill, the non-West is childlike, the West is mature. So, here what you see is that there is a clear-cut hierarchy of knowledge, that the Western society is a mature society and the Eastern society is non-mature and the childlike. So, this kind of the hierarchy of knowledge that you have, that has been challenged, and this kind of knowledge becomes problematic because theories, concepts, categories which have developed in a different context, those concepts are used to explain a context which is completely different. So, the power and knowledge debate, how knowledge travels with power, so that debate is again important when you have to understand a critique of theories. So, mostly theoretical concepts are used in the third world societies and other societies, and here the basic notions are that all the human beings are same, all the human beings are rational, and there has to be unity of method and unity of science. So, these are some of the broader concepts which are used by theory, and those concepts are criticized by the case study people. Those concepts are also criticized by the postmodern discourse based cognitive studies and some of the communication studies. When they do case study, they also criticize these methods that are these theoretical methods. Next, I would like to show you why case study, why you have to do the case study. First, you have to keep in mind that human agents are reflexive. Human beings are not machines. They cannot think like machines. So, they are reflexive, and there is an element of intersubjectivity. As I told you that when two subjects interact, so there is a pattern symbol and there is a kind of trust which exists between them, and you cannot, in theoretical studies, you cannot go into intersubjectivity. If you want to find the intersubjectivity, the case study is the only method, or one of the best method that you have to adopt. And in case study, you give primacy of understanding rather than prediction. Here understanding is important and prediction is not that important. And case study, as I told you, that their case study is very useful for testing the theory, but case study is not useful for developing the theory. So, that you have to, but you have to, if you want to test the theory, even if you do theoretical studies, you will have to do case study if you want to test the theory. The next is, excuse me. Yeah, case studies are useful for policy analysis. Yeah, because policy analysis is contextual. India's foreign policy is completely contextual. India's foreign policy is different from the foreign policy of United Russia, China, and other countries. So, for policy analysis, if you talk to the bureaucrats, if you talk to the policymakers, the very standard argument everywhere is that the academics are very abstract. They are not relevant for policy making, they are not useful for us. So, this is the standard reply of the policymakers when they interact with the academics. They say that academics is very, very abstract, and so they say that mostly because they do not follow theories and they consider theories not to be so useful for policy making, and as a result they would like to have case study and contextual study which focuses on a particular specific case rather than the theory. So, for policy making, the case studies are very, very relevant. And if you, for example, if you want to do a study of, say, India's foreign policy, so in that case, by and large it becomes a case study, because India's foreign policy is guided by the particular case, particular context that you have in India rather than the other country. So, in that case, it becomes important that for policy making, the case studies become important, and that you have to keep in mind, and that's the reason it's very useful. Most of the management studies, most of the public administration studies, and when they try to understand the behavior of the firms and the productivity of different firms in business houses, they would like to have case study rather than theoretical studies. So, case studies are very, very relevant for certain kind of studies, and you have to understand what kind of study you plan to do, and your research should be guided by those considerations. So, research question is important, which will determine the kind of whether you want to do case study or you want to do theoretical study. And also because in case study you go into very detailed analysis, you do in-depth analysis, you go do a very intensive hard work, and you become a participant observer. So, here you interact with a number of variables which may not be possible if you are planning to do a theoretical study. In theoretical models, for example, you might have 5, 10, 15, 20 variables, but if you do a case study, you come across a number of variables, and these variables can generate new hypotheses. These variables can also generate new kind of concept, which may not be possible if you do just the theoretical study. So that is the reason when in the case study people criticize theoretical study, they argue that theoretical studies are superficial, they do not explain much, they do not explain the case, and for that for that this case study is important, because it can generate new hypotheses, it can generate new kind of hypothesis, and it can also generate new kind of data which might be useful for theoretical studies. And now I'd also like to point out there are certain strength of case study. One, as I told you, that testing hypothesis and theory, that is one of the major reasons why case study is still popular in today's world, and in whether this anthropology follows by and large the case study method, and history, which is historical method, but again is very similar to the case study method. For example, if I have to study, say, the French Revolution, so that becomes more like a case study, because I'm studying the French Revolution, the particular case of French Revolution, which is not similar to any other revolution. So that becomes more like a case study rather than the other study. So for some of the studies, case studies are very, very useful, and case studies are also useful for high conceptual validity. Here, the relationship between two variables or two events are not superfluous, and they are not just regularities, they are based on high conceptual, because you have gone into the detail, you have gone into the exact causal mechanism. So here the important things are the important relations which exist between two causes or intermediary causes. So that comes out very clearly, which may not be possible if you're doing just the theoretical study. And as I told you, that is very important for policy relevance. So these are the strength of case studies. And between the theories and case studies, Robert Merton is one scholar sociologist who argues that there are some certain middle length theories, the theories which are not universal in nature, but which apply theories which apply to some of the context for some area or some of the people. So those theories are known as the middle length theories, and those theories can be, for those kind of theories, case studies can be extremely useful. Now let me point out what are the problems with the case study. One of the important problems is the selection bias, because you want to study, for example, ethnic conflict, and for that you have selected one case, which is selecting the case on the basis of dependent variable, which is ethnic crisis in this case. So you try to select the case on the basis of just the dependent variable. So that might be problematic, because when you generate hypothesis or when you confirm your hypothesis, it can be you can over confirm the hypothesis. So that selection bias is one problem if you do the case study. The second is even in the case study there can be several interpretations. If I do case study and person B is doing, a person C is doing, so all of them, even if they do case study, they can come to some kind of different kind of interpretation. So there the problem is that how do you know which interpretation is valid? So even if you do case study, there is no guarantee that all the people who do case study, they come to the same conclusion. And researchers' subjective bias can over confirm their favorite hypothesis in the case study. And in the case study, there is a lack of representativeness, because in case study you do just one case or two cases or 3 or 4 cases. So in that case, there is no representation, the large representation which is there in the theoretical studies where you have large number of cases. In this case, you do not have proper representation of various cases. So that is again one problem which has been pointed out by various scholars. And the scope is bounded. This is very clear that you have done just one case study and you have not done a number of cases. So in that case, your scope is limited. If you have done one case, your validity or your prediction would be valid by and large for one case, unless until you are extremely lucky that you have done one case and then you can predict for all the cases. So that's very unlikely kind of event. But otherwise, your scope is very limited in the case study. Now, finally, I come to the conclusion. The first thing that you should ask yourself that whether you should do a case study or the theoretical study. The important thing here to remember is that this should be determined by the research question that you have in your mind. Your research question will determine whether you should do a case study or you should do a theoretical study. And also keep in mind that the case-based contextual analysis are integral to non-hegemonic theory construction, because most of the hegemonic theories have been constructed in the West, and if you do a case study, you will find that many of the theories will not apply to the different contexts. So for generating non-hegemonic theories, it's important that you do certain case study, and case study in that sense is very, very important. And as far as the process, the logical process is concerned, logical process about generating theory, logical process can be inductive or deductive. It does not matter. Although I highlighted the Popper's deductive method, but theories across the discipline, you will find that theories are generated on the basis of induction as well as deduction. So you can use any kind of logic for deducting theory. It can be inductive or it can be deductive. The important thing to keep in mind is that there has to be plurality of method rather than dominance of one method. What has happened in the last 100-200 years, that the positivist method, they have dominated the knowledge process. They have dominated the entire discipline, all the disciplines in the world. So that method need to be challenged. And case study, historical studies, and the postmodern cognitive studies, these are some of the methods through which this dominance can be challenged. And finally, one of the important things for Indians and all the third world scholars to remember is that rather than importing the concepts and categories and the theories from outside, we should try to generate the theory and the concepts on the basis of our own context rather than borrowing the theories and the concepts from outside. So that is one of the biggest challenge for any social science researcher in a country like India. So with this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation here. I hope you liked it. Thank you.
So you said that it depends according to the research problem that which method, case study or theoretical may be adopted.
Yeah.
But in certain cases, as you said, that suppose we talk about the Naxal problems.
Yeah.
So we have both of the, we have one way we can do a case study of policy of the government, what are steps they are taking and what are the context they want
Yeah.
to handle.
Yeah.
And others, we want to explain this conflict of interest through the theoretical perspective. So
Yeah.
can we adopt both of the methods, or is only one of them will be sufficient to explain the problem of Naxal?
That's a very important question, and because the question that he has asked me, that whether if he wants to do a study of Naxalism in India, the problem of Naxalism that you have in India, whether the research should be case study or theoretical study. This is very important for the simple reason that you have different cases of Naxal problem in different states of India. For example, the Naxalism you have in a place like Chhattisgarh, you have in a place like Andhra, you have in a place like Bihar, then you have in places like some parts of Odisha. So if you do a broad generalization, that study can be theoretical. Or the same kind of thing you have in Nepal also. So that also you can bring into picture when you try to generalize theories on Naxalism. But now the point is whether he should do a case study, whether he should go and study just say the case of Chhattisgarh or the case of Bihar or the case of Jharkhand, or whether he should do the comparative study. See, if you see the most of the literature of Naxalism, for example, what has happened is that they are based on case study. And the general explanation for Naxalism is that the unemployment, caste atrocity, the developmental problems, displacement, these are the major causes which are given to explain the concept of Naxalism. These are the causes which explain Naxalism in the most of the literature. But I want to ask you one thing, that suppose if you have to compare the case of Bihar or the case of Chhattisgarh with say the case of Uttar Pradesh, UP. So in that case, why do you find that all these problems are there, undevelopment is there, the unemployment is there, the caste atrocity is there, but why is it that the problem is there in Bihar, which is very similar to UP, but why the same problem of Naxalism is not there in UP? And now the important thing is not UP here. The important thing is that when you do generalization, when you do a comparison, it's possible that you will start looking for some different kind of causation, some other type of variations. For example, how will you explain the case of UP? All these problems are there, but the Naxal problem is not as intense as you have in Bihar and Chhattisgarh. So that gives you start looking for this in research method literature can be taken as counterfactuals. So when you compare, you try to find out the counterfactuals, and counterfactuals help you establish the causation. And that's the reason comparison is important, and that's the reason even if you do case study, some kind of comparison, some kind of generalization becomes very important, and through generalization you can better establish the causation. So once you know that these causes are there in UP but Naxalism is not there, so then you will start looking for some other causes which might have led to the problem of Naxalism. So that is the advantage, and for this kind of study the case study is very important, but again I'll suggest you that you should do some kind of comparison, then you can come to some kind of broad general theories or broader understanding of Naxalism and the causes of Naxalism in India.
Okay. So, and if we go to understand the policy of the governments, be it state government or central governments,
Yeah.
so in that case, what we need to do? Only just a case study will do how they have tried to solve this problem over the years.
Yeah. Here also there is a little tricky part here that even if you want to study, say, policy, the policies, you can study the policies in 1990s, say the Indian states policy in 1990 and the later. But in that case, it becomes more like a case study. But when you try to compare that, say, with 1980s, 1960s also you had the Naxal problem, and when you try to compare, then again you have to go for some kind of generalization, and then again you have to see that how policies of 1960s were different from the policies in 1970s and 1980s. So there you do some kind of generalization. But by and large, since you are comparing just 2-3 cases here, 2 periods here, so that study would be by and large case study rather than theoretical study.
Okay. The same when we come to on the crime situation. Suppose one crime happened in best part of the. We have a caller from Delhi. So let us take question first from. Then we'll have a discussion.
Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome. You please ask your question.
हेलो सर.
Yeah. Please ask your question.
हाँ, मैं अपना क्वेश्चन पूछूं. हेलो.
जी सवाल पूछिए.
सर मैं ये जानना चाहता था. हाँ हेलो सर.
हाँ सवाल पूछिए.
हाँ कि ये जो अन्ना जी का और ये आंदोलन, जो अन्ना और रामदेव का आंदोलन हो रहा है, इसमें आपके इसके परिप्रेक्ष्य में आप क्या जवाब देंगे?
ये तो आप इस पर रिसर्च क्या करना चाहते हैं उसके ऊपर निर्भर करता है.
देखिए, इस पे मैं बोलूँ. हाँ, देखिए, आपका सवाल बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट है कि अगर आपको मान लीजिए कि अन्ना जी का जो मूवमेंट हो रहा है इसको स्टडी करना है, तो इसको कैसे स्टडी करेंगे? इसको या आप एक केस के रूप में स्टडी करेंगे या इसको थेरीज के रूप में स्टडी करेंगे? देखिए, इसके 2 तरीके. एक तो आपकी अन्ना जी के मूवमेंट, जो एंटी करप्शन मूवमेंट है अन्ना जी और रामदेव जी का, उनका तो आप एक केस स्टडी कर सकते हैं कि जो अभी जो 2-3 मूवमेंट्स हुए थे इस साल और इसके पिछले साल, तो इसका एक केस स्टडी आप कर सकते हैं. लेकिन इसको आप लार्जर थ्योरेटिकल पर्सपेक्टिव में अगर देखना है तो आपको इसको एक सोशल मूवमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव में देखना पड़ेगा. आप देखेंगे कि ये एक सोशल मूवमेंट का पार्ट है और पूरे वर्ल्ड में बहुत सारे सोशल मूवमेंट्स हुए हैं और उसी तरह का यह एक सोशल मूवमेंट है. तो जब उस पर्सपेक्टिव में देखेंगे तो आपका स्टडी वो थ्योरेटिकल हो जाता है. लेकिन अगर अन्ना जी के मूवमेंट को आप इंडिपेंडेंटली देखना चाहते हैं, अकेले देखना चाहते हैं, तो उस रूप में ये एक केस स्टडी हो जाएगा. तो इस चीज़ को आपको ध्यान रखना पड़ेगा. और आपको इस केस में मुझे लगता है कि केस स्टडी भी कीजिए, उनके मूवमेंट को स्टडी कीजिए, उनके मूवमेंट के डिफरेंट डायनेमिक्स को स्टडी कीजिए. लेकिन उसको अगर एक सोशल मूवमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव में देखना चाहते हैं तो वो आपके लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण होगा. तो इसको आप दोनों पर्सपेक्टिव में देख सकते हैं. मैं इसको चॉइस दूंगा कि आप खुद डिसाइड कीजिए. लेकिन मेरा अगर सजेशन चाहते हैं तो इसमें आप केस स्टडी कीजिए, लेकिन एक लार्जर सोशल पर्सपेक्टिव में इसको देखने की कोशिश कीजिए.
और अगर इसका हम इम्पैक्ट स्टडीज करना चाहे तो?
हाँ, तो इसका इम्पैक्ट स्टडी करने के लिए आपको ये बहुत ही मुश्किल है, क्योंकि इसका इम्पैक्ट डायरेक्ट पॉजिटिव नहीं है. अभी तक तो लोकपाल बिल एक्सेप्ट भी नहीं हुआ है पार्लियामेंट में, तो इसका इम्पैक्ट को एसेस करना बहुत मुश्किल है. लेकिन इसका एक इम्पैक्ट एक दूसरे तरीके से अगर आप करना चाहते हैं तो आप देखेंगे कि उसके बाद, उस मूवमेंट के बाद जहाँ जहाँ इलेक्शन हुए हैं, जहाँ जहाँ इलेक्शन बाई इलेक्शंस हुए हैं, तो वहाँ पे जो चूँकि मेन टारगेट उसकी कांग्रेस पार्टी थी, तो कांग्रेस पार्टी के क्या रिजल्ट्स रहे हैं. अगर आप देखेंगे कि कई जगह से कांग्रेस पार्टी हार गई है, कई जगह से जीती भी है, तो आप उस आधार पर निर्धारित कर सकते हैं कि इसका क्या रिजल्ट अभी हुआ है. और फिर अभी इलेक्शन, एक नेशनल इलेक्शन भी होने वाला है कुछ दिनों में, वहाँ पे माना जा रहा है कि इस मूवमेंट का काफ़ी असर पड़ा है. तो इसके थ्रू से आप इस तरीके से आप देख सकते हैं कि इसका क्या इम्पैक्ट है.
ओके, सो वी वर टॉकिंग अबाउट द crime situation. Suppose some crimes occurred in the western part of the Delhi, some in northern parts and the eastern parts. So if we compare all these crime and then come to a certain conclusion, so certainly when we analyze the crime separately, then it will be a case study. But when we want to explain it, will be need theory.
Yeah.
So case study itself will be a complete research, or we need to explain all this?
This is right. जैसे कि as you said that in theoretical studies, if I give you a picture, if you give the crime data, for example, crime data as you have in the government, central government has the crime data, so that gives a picture that there are for example, I'm saying, I'm not giving the exact figure. For example, there are 5,000 killings in a year in Delhi, or there are 1 lakh killings in all over India. So that gives you an aggregate picture. Now you are living in a state of Chhattisgarh, for example, that does not give you the real picture, right? Even if you have the aggregate theoretical data, so that is not explaining your particular case that you have in the case of Chhattisgarh. So in that case, you would like to do a case study where you would like to know that what exactly is happening in the case of Chhattisgarh. So there you need to do a case study of violence in Chhattisgarh. But again, if you want to have the aggregate picture, if you want to have a broad theoretical picture of India, so in that case you have to compare various cases. For example, you have to take in the case of South India, you have to take the cases from Eastern India, Western India, Northern India, Central India, and then you have to randomize the sample, and then you can come to a general theoretical conclusion about violence.
Okay,
so
that's true. But in short, I want to know the difference between perspective of investigator and researcher.
Yes, see, by and large, sometimes people say that investigator is same as researcher, but many times investigators are employed by the researcher, by the scientist, to do some kind of investigation. Yeah. For example, if I want to do a survey, what I'll do is that I'll employ some investigators who will help me in doing the research. So there is no clear-cut difference here, but many times this kind of difference is established between the investigator and the researcher.
Well, friends. Very clearly, Dr. Rajan Kumar explained the case study and theoretical study, its difference, and when we need to adopt which methods. I think now it's clear to all of you who have benefited from today's lecture. So with this, we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf, I thank Dr. Rajan Kumar for giving such a wonderful lecture on this difficult topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.